We have an unusual event, our psychoanalytic ManifestoFest. We will discuss a little bit about what inspired us to do this panel. The most brief way of introducing it is that a group of us got together and decided that the current zeitgeist in psychoanalysis is to try to find a way to be accessible to the public and to discover a way of speaking beyond speaking to each other. And so you'll discover that the art of manifesto writing is something that we're just beginning to get a little bit of practice with, and we have something to learn about it. And some of us did some reading on the history of manifestos after we wrote our manifestos, so a little bit in reverse of what might have been ideal. And you'll see that some of us are addressing you, the audience, and others of us are kind of speaking more broadly about psychoanalysis. So we'll talk about this. I'd like to start by introducing Esther Sperber, who's going to give a little bit more of a thorough introduction, because Esther really is the person who spearheaded our decision to do this together. And why am I missing Esther's bio? Esther? Well, Esther is a fantastic colleague of ours in psychoanalysis because she's trained as an architect, and all of her learning in psychoanalysis is kind of just, she's completely self-taught. And she's the most erudite psychoanalyst probably of any of us on this panel, because there's nothing she hasn't read. And she's so interested in the space between physical and psychological spaces, and she can tell you more about her practice as an architect, but it's been fascinating to work with her, and she's very active on the Unbehagen Listserv, and a pleasure to know. So Esther, come on and introduce her.
Hi everyone. It's really great to be here. In the spirit of manifestos and political performance type things, we also printed a lot of copies of our manifestos. It was the same price from 0 to 1,000, so we picked 1,000. So help us by taking some later, and also by making sure that everyone else at the conference takes some and disseminate them. I wanted to start with a little manifesto about manifestos. We came here today, this group, to try to remind all of us why we love psychoanalysis and to learn how we can better share that love with a wider world. Psychoanalysis gives us a particular way of understanding the world: childhood, love, conflict, obesity, art, topics that fill the printed papers and online news feeds. And while I'm not nostalgic for a time, maybe half a century ago, when psychoanalysis had one voice and a uniform view, I'm also frustrated with the new status quo, in which analysts spend an inspiring and frustrating amount of time writing for one another, keeping their words safely isolated behind the subscription walls of PepWeb. So I indulge in manifesting about manifestos, unabashedly trying to seduce you to use, at least sometimes, a different kind of mode of writing in order to effect change in the world. While there's a great deal of value in carefully crafted clinical presentation, theoretical explorations, footnotes, citations, I feel it is urgent for the well-being of psychoanalysis to develop new ways of speaking confidently, to distill clearly what the field has to offer and why it matters. I realize this isn't easy. So much of the analytic training promotes the opposite mindset, one of reflection, ambivalence, nuance, non-judgment, a resistance to action, an observing eye. Manifestos express a very different mentality, a different side of the self. They must be assured, forceful, and convincing. The word manifesto has two Latin origins. Manifestus, I'm sure I'm pronouncing this wrong, which means obvious, and manifesto, which means make public. Therefore, the manifesto's aim is to make the obvious public. Manifestos, although omnipotent and playful, were powerful tools for the avant-garde movements of the 20th century. At its most endearing, writes Mary Ann Cause in her big yellow book titled Manifestos, A Century of Isms, a manifesto has a madness about it. It is particular, angry, quirky, and downright crazy. The manifesto is by nature a loud genre. Unlike the essay, it calls for capital letters, loves bigness, and demands attention. She describes the politics of a manifesto as nowness and newness. Words and ideas can create change. Think of the enduring influence of the Communist Manifesto, published in 1848. Or in the area of art, think of Barnett Newman's essay, written 100 years later in 1948, titled The Sublime Is Now, in which he turns the obvious disadvantage of American art, its lack of history, into a potential advantage, freeing the artist from the dead weight of European history. The heyday of manifestos was the decade between 1909 and 1919, when Marinetti published the first Futurist manifesto, followed by Malevich, the Cubist, Dada, the Surrealist, among others. Manifestos were published as pamphlets posted on walls and showered like rain in public plazas. And manifestos are always arrogant. They call for action, oppose the existing, demand change, sometimes even become violent. Leave Dada, leave your parents, leave your wife, called one. Generally, Mary Ann Cause tells us the manifesto stands alone. It does not lean on or refer to other texts, and sometimes a short sentence can capture a big idea. No architect can forget Mies van der Rohe's modernist Less and More, or its modification by Robert Venturi, Less is a bore. In fact, Cause writes, architects have adopted the manifesto style as their professional dialect, and maybe that's why I was drawn to this. Psychoanalysis has a unique body of knowledge which it uses to address patient symptoms. But these insights have the power to affect a wider sphere and to transform the way we view individuals and their relationships. So let us indulge in this kind of speech and play together and see where it takes us.